First of all, we have the nesting dies. These come in all different sizes, all different shapes, and we've got the squares, we've got butterflies. They're good for patchwork, they're good for applique, they're good for, these ones are particularly good for like bunting, stuff like that. We have a fantastic fabric range from Riley Blake Fabrics, and it's called Bliss. This clutch bag I'm going to try and steal and go home with so I can go out tonight. We've got some really lovely projects, and it just, I think, shows off how absolutely amazing the fabrics are. There's some little bit of glittery detail on there, and it's just, oh, absolutely divine. And also the curved dies. So there are 4 different sets of curved dies, and they all work with the builder block concept. So you are building blocks using curved pieces. So I'll explain those in more detail shortly, but first of all, let's have a little look at the nesting dies and what you can do with those. So I have been working on a hexagon quilt for about 8 years, a little bit too long. So this is my hexagon quilt. As you can see, it's not really much of a quilt. It's more random bits of fabric sewn together, and one day it will magically turn into a quilt, hopefully, she says. When I first started this, I would cut out all of my paper pieces by hand using scissors, and also my fabrics by hand using scissors. Until now, when I got the hexagon nesting dies. These are absolutely fantastic for English paper piecing, which is what my hexagon quilt is. So I can use this die here to cut out my paper pieces, and I've just used index cards to cut my paper pieces out, and then I can use the next size up to cut my fabrics. I'll show you how we do that. So I've got some fabric here. I'm going to lay that on my plate. Now I've brought my plates and shim from at home, and this is the one that I use all the time. And some people have commented before when I'm doing demos that, you know, your plates can get kind of a little bit battered. Yes, they can, just as anything can when you use it a lot. I use mine all the time, and you know, as you can see, there's plenty of use in there. You can see all the marks from using the dies, but there's still so much life left in these plates. They really do last, even though they might not look as fresh as when they first came out of the pack. Don't worry about it. Sometimes I think, you know, I look a little bit battered. I work okay, most of the time anyway. Sometimes a little bit less than other times. But you know, we all have our rough days. My plates are exactly the same. We'll pass that through the machine. As we know, it takes about 17 seconds. And there are my fabrics. I've got 8 layers cut in one go, one pass. I can also cut my card. So I'm using index cards. You can actually use whatever paper you've got kind of lying around. I find one of the things that works really well is bills. You get them every month. Sometimes they're less useful than others. Just stick those through, cut your paper shapes out with your bills. Council tax bill, perfect. Tax bill, even better. So I've layered here. It all depends on the thickness of your card or your paper. I've got 4 layers here. It'll probably do 5. If you're using regular copy paper or bills, then you'll probably get more layers. and you just pass that through exactly the same as you did with your fabric. And with English paper piecing, it's a little bit different to normal patchwork. You are using the paper to kind of stabilise your block, and you wrap your fabric around your paper piece. So it is a little bit more confusing than regular patchwork, but it's the best way to sew together these really kind of awkward shapes, like a hexagon. Because if you're going to sew the hexagons together by machine, it's perfectly possible, but you end up with a kind of awkward Y seam, which is fine, you know. You just have to kind of think about it a little bit more. English paper piecing makes that so much simpler. There are 3 different ways in which you can baste or tack your fabric to your paper shapes. And I am going to demonstrate how you can do those 3 different ways. So the first way, and this is probably the simplest way, it's the quickest way, it's the way that I tend to go to if I don't have a lot of time, and that's with a glue pen. Now you can use just a regular paper glue pen, you know, like that brand name that begins with a P, just from a paper shop, newsagents, wherever, and you just swipe on the paper close to the edge, fold your fabric over. Now you're going to feel for the fabric, making sure that it hits the edge of your paper, so it's nice and tight. Move around to the next side, same again. Now you don't want too much glue, and you don't want it to be too tight. You want to make sure that you've got that edge, but not that you're kind of pulling it too taut, because when you go to sew your shapes together, then it gets a little bit tricky. Carry on all the way around, just press in, swipe in, and press in. You can get specific fabric glue pens. I've got one here, but like I say, you can also just use regular water-soluble glue stick pen thing. And that's done. That's it. Your shape is all nicely tacked or basted, no matter which way you want to say it. The next way is thread. Now you take a length of thread about the length of your forearm. You don't really want any longer than that, because any longer than that and it's going to start tangling up, and you don't want your thread tangling. You're going to start in the same way that you did before. Just lay your paper shape in the middle of your fabric, fold down the first side, feel for that edge again, and then go to the first corner and fold over and hold that. Now this, once you've done it a few times, it kind of clicks in your brain, but it is a little bit tricky at first. You can pin your paper to your fabric if you're struggling a little bit and it's wriggling around and getting on your nerves. But once you've got it, you're just going to hold finger on one side, thumb on the other, hold that in place, and you're going to take your needle and go just through that corner, but only through the fabric, not through the paper. So you're not going all the way through. You're just going to feel with your needle through there, like that. Give it a little tug. And just sew a couple of stitches to make sure that it holds in place. Wriggle to the end, to the next corner, do the same, fold over, and then needle through, just through the fabric, not through the paper. Scoot along to the next one, fold it over, same again, needle through, and again. I'm just going to carry on doing the same thing all the way around. pull the thread kind of tight, but not super tight. If you pull it too tight, you're going to distort the paper shape, and if you distort your paper shape, then it's going to be more difficult for you to sew it together. There we go. Got to the end. A couple of stitches just to hold it in place so it doesn't fall out, and snip your thread off. Now the beauty of doing it this way is that when you've finished sewing all your shapes together, you don't have to snip any of your basting threads. You can just pull that paper shape out, which saves you a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. Now the last way, just to bombard you with choices, is also sewing through the papers, but you're going to go all the way through this time. Now this one is one of the oldest, probably the most traditional way. This is the way that my quilt that was on my bed when I was little, that's the way that my mum sewed it, because she missed some of the papers and they were still sewed in. I used to be able to feel them. So you're going to go all the way through. Make sure that you don't pull your thread all the way out, and a couple of stay stitches just to hold it in place. Move to that first corner, and this time you're going to go further away, needle through the fabric and through the paper, then back to the other side of the fold, and then to the next corner. So you're effectively kind of doing like a little cross where your fabric fold is. All the way through. And if you're doing a whole quilt, and if you have got a lot of these hexagons to tack, then this is going to blunt your needle a little bit, and it's also going to put more pressure on your hand and your wrist. So whilst this is a great method, it's the most secure method, it's also the one that will hurt your hands the most in the long run. So we're going to do a couple of stay stitches just to hold it in place, and then snip your thread off. So those are your 3 different versions. They all do the same job, they do exactly the same thing, but 3 different ways. And it's just a case of deciding which one you like best and which one you feel most comfortable with. Give them all a try and go from there.